In all of London, a place known for its dark history and haunted locations, there is no place more sinister than Bedlam Hospital, better known as Bedlam Asylum. The name Bedlam brings to mind chaos and being out of control, while the word originated from London's very first insane asylum, with reports of hauntings from the hospital stretching back decades, and in various locations, voices from the past break through the foreboding silence. Today we will look at some of the patients and the reasons why they were admitted to Bedlam Asylum, as well as some of the terrible treatments that were carried out in the name of medicine. Brace yourself, dissectors, this episode is going to get tough. Originally named St Mary of Bethlehem in 1247, the hospital was established as a hospice. By 1337, the institution was moved to a new location and its name was changed to Bedlam Hospital, or Bedlam for short. By 1815, the hospital found its final location in Lambeth, which today stands as the Imperial War Museum. It was the largest psychiatric hospital in the world, but this was at a time when little was really known about mental health. But did that stop us from abusing those in need? Did it? Hell. You see, some of the treatments were so horrible. It not only inspired the 1946 horror film Bedlam, but made many angry spirits decide to stick around after death. By the 1400s, Bedlam started to admit patients who were referred to at the time as lunatics. As I said, they had little to no idea at all about how to treat these poor people, and when some became aggressive or agitated, fear made the staff treat the patients with disdain. The patients were often referred to as prisoners, and in their time they would be treated to the harshest of treatments, like being put in stocks, chained to walls and manacled. The more violent patients would also be whipped within an inch of their lives and dunked in freezing cold water, because we all know that's sure to calm them down, right? But some patients were also allowed outside of the hospital grounds, but seemingly not for the good of their health, but to earn money. One person is reported as saying, in 1598, the house was reported so loathsome and so filthy kept as not to be fit to be entered, and the inmates were termed prisoners. Some patients were allowed out of the hospital during the day, licensed to beg on the streets of London. After the Great Fire of London in 1666, Bedlam Asylum was moved to Moorfields and was the first ever established to accommodate the insane. But this was something that had a very dark history attached to it, and the staff should be ashamed of themselves. You see, you could visit the asylum if you were willing to pay the shilling to enter. You'd walk through the outside building, met by two gargoyles that were said to represent rave and melancholic. From here, you'd be able to see the lunatics, stare at them, mock them for your amusement. And this is how many of the poor patients spent the rest of their days. Visitors would also be met with the sound of cries of anguish, moaning and rattling chains. But this was met with indifference. After all, it didn't affect them, did it? One person commented, the practice of showing the patients like wild beasts was abolished in 1770. But the abolition was unaccompanied by any other improvements in their treatment. And like many asylums of the past, you didn't even need to be thought of as insane to end up inside. In fact, if you were a strong-minded woman who wouldn't do as you were told, or if you were someone struggling with the aftermath of war, nowadays known to be PTSD, you'd end up in Bedlam. You see, back then, if you were thought of as an embarrassment, a hindrance, or maybe even different, with 2 doctors' signatures, you could find yourself locked away for the rest of your life. And scarily, this practice was done more often than you'd want to believe. When the hospital was discovered to be mistreating patients, again, it was moved for a third and final time to where the Imperial War Museum stands today. The kinds of treatments that were carried out are pretty grim to say the least. One of the treatments was invented by the grandfather of Charles Darwin, a Mr. Erasmus Darwin. Named rotational therapy, the idea was to tie a patient to a chair, which would then be suspended in mid-air and spun for hours at a time. Bloody hell, I'm pretty sure I would barf everywhere. Maybe that was the plan. Vomit the madness up. By the 18th and 19th centuries, patients were being beaten severely, submerged in ice baths, and for good measure, starved. It was during this period that a man named Edward Wakefield visited Bedlam in 1814, and he told of his horror at witnessing naked men starved and chained to walls. So who resided inside these walls and was treated to the kindness of the establishment, you might wonder? During 1846 to 1858, photographer Henry Herring took pictures to show the faces of the inmates and how the evidence of their mental health was evident from their facial expressions. So let's look at some of these patients who lived at Bedlam and the reasons they were admitted. Sarah was a 26-year-old woman who worked as a domestic servant and was admitted to Bedlam in 1857. It was found that she was suffering from great mental depression. Richard Dad was a famed artist who stabbed his father to death as he believed him to be the devil. Poor Eliza Jocelyn arrived at Bedlam in 1857, and the reason was because she was overworked. The poor lady was the only servant working in a 20-room house and was said to be struggling with her workload during the harsh winter months. You see, each room needed to have a fire burning to keep the property warm. Each fire took a while to light. After all the fires were lit, how was there any time to do the rest of her chores? She was diagnosed with acute melancholia. Captain George Johnston was sent to the asylum in 1846 after apparently suffering from mania. He was later charged with a homicide. Some of the hospital's most notable patients are also as follows. Poor John Frith was really struggling as, while he was alive, he believed himself to be St. Paul. And it was while he was delusional that he attacked King George III's coach as he travelled to Parliament by throwing a rock at him in January of 1790. He claimed he never meant to harm the king and was later found insane and unfit for trial. In her time on the throne, Queen Victoria had many attempts made on her life. In 1840, Edward Oxford was sent to Bedlam after he tried to fire a gun at the Queen, and he missed both times. Lucky for Queen Victoria, not so much for Edward, who was named insane. Jonathan Martin was an arsonist who set fire to the York Minster in 1829. He should have been given the death penalty, but was cleared by the judge on the grounds of insanity. Jonathan died at Bedlam 9 years later. And lastly, we have Margaret Nicholson, who tried to kill King George III in 1786 with a dessert knife. She is said to have lunged at his chest twice before being apprehended. Again, she was found insane and died inside Bedlam. As you can see, this place has seen a huge abundance of mistreatment, historic figures and horrors, a perfect environment for the paranormal, you might say. And with Bedlam Asylum having been in numerous locations during its time, the ghosts are scattered across London. Our first haunted location, thanks to the mistreatment of Bedlam Asylum, is the London Underground. You see, in February of 1874, the Liverpool Street Underground station was opened, and on the original site of Bedlam Asylum. Even before the station was built, the location had many reports of strange events. From 1750 to 1812, witnesses claimed they could hear the sound of a woman patient from Bedlam, as her spirit would constantly cry out or scream from the darkness. The next spirit will bring a tear to your eyes. Young Rebecca Griffins fell in love, but her feelings were not reciprocated. Living in a merchant's house by London Bridge, the young girl fell in love with an Indian gentleman who had been lodging with her. Rebecca was so convinced that he loved her too. She was stunned to find he was leaving to travel back to India. Just as he was about to leave, he placed a gold sovereign in her hand and then walked away. It's believed that she simply snapped when he left, and it didn't take long for her to take her place at Bedlam Asylum. In the time that she was alive, she refused to let go of the coin, always firmly gripping it in her hand. When she died from wasting away, one of the guards decided to take her most precious item from her before she was buried. From that day on, guards, visitors and inmates claimed to see her spirit wandering the halls of Bedlam, searching for the coin that was taken away from her. Rebecca is still active to this day, with many believing she won't be able to rest until her coin is back in her hand. Lastly, during the Second World War, a detachment of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force was stationed inside the Imperial War Museum. Many didn't know the history of Bedlam Asylum and so thought little of staying there, until the sounds of moaning and chains rattling started to keep the ladies awake at night. It got so bad that after countless reports from the women of strange happenings, they had to be moved to a different location. The Bedlam spirits certainly made themselves known. So what do you think of Bedlam Asylum? Honestly, not much surprises me anymore with how poorly we can treat each other, but taking payment from people so that they could abuse the patients is just disgusting. These were people entrusted to care for people's loved ones, or did they just assume that those who resided at Bedlam was someone's embarrassment? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, Dissectors. I hope it gave you a shiver or three. And as always, until next time, stay safe out there.